speaking of stupid stuff, you want to do a show?
Why, yes, I do. Ready to ride this crazy train? Here we go. Today is Sunday, October 15th, 2017, and this is episode 203 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Hello, Jerry. Good to see you, sir.
Likewise.
I know we missed last week with our crazy travel schedules and such.
Yes, indeed. Hopefully it will start settling down some.
Yeah, how many more weeks on the road do you have?
2.5.
Not too bad. Not too bad.
Then I may be going to Europe for several weeks. So we'll see. Yeah.
Wait, you're not caught up in that Harvey Weinstein situation, are you?
Well, it's.
Hey, that is one good thing cybersecurity's got going for it.
Yeah. We're
not Hollywood.
We're not Hollywood. That's right. Oh, we do seem to have our own set of issues. So, speaking of that, just before we get any farther, the thoughts and opinions we expressed on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers. Ever.
Past, present, or future.
Yeah. Anyhow, just a reminder, a couple things. First, thank you to our Patreon donors. Definitely appreciate that. It helps us put on the show and do lots of cool stuff. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you guys. You guys are awesome. And
if you want to be a Patreon donor, you can go to our website and find the link to our Patreon page. I guess our next appearance will be at the O'Reilly Security Conference.
We're doing appearances now, are we?
Well,
we're that fancy.
Yeah, that's right. Cameo, right?
But yes, we will be at the O'Reilly Security Conference, running the Ignite track.
That's right.
In fact, we just picked the speakers for that. I think that the call for papers closed, and we were a little remiss in getting that done, but we got it done, and hopefully notifications have gone out.
Better late than never.
Yes.
And then,
but we'll be also hanging around for the rest of the conference too.
Yes, should be a good time. It was fun last time, and lots of good stuff there. And then in March we will be at the Tactical Edge conference in Bogota, Colombia.
Yes, I know. In fact, details of my talk has been distributed, so it's out there. I put it on LinkedIn and Twitter, talking about basically how we need to shift our mindset a bit from thinking of our InfoSec problems as purely technical and looking at the fact that there's a huge psychological component, but we still think 80% technical.
Should be good.
At least that's my current rambling. Yeah. We'll see how it goes.
Mine will be about what I've learned for 5 years of analyzing breaches.
Wait, no, you realize it's a full hour, right? This isn't a 5-minute talk.
Oh, shoot. I didn't think that through very well, did I? All right. Anyway, so let's get into our stories for tonight.
I'm sure that you will have all sorts of interesting, wonderful things to say on that front. But I'm still going to heckle and make fun of you.
I know. Mm-hmm. I've come to expect that. All right. Well, I guess, there's some late breaking news. We certainly still need that sound effect. Apparently, there is a dumpster fire burning on the Wi-Fi front. We don't fully understand exactly what all is going on, but it appears to be related to random number generation and encryption protocol downgrades, resulting in WPA2 being pretty easy to decrypt. Details coming out tomorrow. So
Indeed. Now, by the time we publish this, the details may already be out.
That's right.
We're recording on Sunday night. And as far as I can recall, I have not done research, but this may be the first effective Is this the first effective attack, if it is what it is, against WPA2?
As far as I'm aware, yes.
Yeah, you know what? I have not done. Take that with a grain of salt. I have not done research on that to confirm. I cannot remember another one, but my God, I'm old. I can't remember everything.
Yeah. So if you have not had a chance to throw away your wireless equipment lately, this might be a good opportunity, since none of it's going to get patched anyway.
Well, it might,
Yeah, sure.
depending. I mean,
Pigs could fly
we'll
too.
see.
You're right. Absolutely.
Anything can fly with enough thrust, man. Anything.
Yeah, yeah. All those androids could get patched too someday.
It just depends on your definition of flight.
That's true. All right.
So yeah, something's coming with WPA2. Keep an eye on the Twitters and the blogospheres and in that world. I mean, do we have a logo yet? Do we have a name for this?
Apparently, there will be a logo and website tomorrow.
Is there a theme song?
I don't know about the theme song. I hope so. I mean,
Bumper music.
They really need to up their games.
I'm still looking for a mascot.
Well, I mean, that might be. I don't know. Anyhow, so by the way, I was thinking about that. What would you do if that were, I'm hoping that this isn't as bad as it seems, but I was kind of thinking about over dinner, what would I do if that were the case? And the only reasonable thing I can come up with is basically turning your company Wi-Fi into like guest Wi-Fi and making everybody VPN in. Just
assume that your Wi-Fi is as dirty as the internet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the only thing I could come up with.
Thanks. That's very helpful.
Yeah, no problem.
You solved the problem. Just turn it off.
Turn off encryption, in fact.
Well, that works until you start thinking about phones and tablets and stuff that may not have as robust VPN software. Like if it's a laptop, sure, right? That makes sense. But if your executives are used to popping up a laptop and getting into their business intelligence software, an iPad, and roaming around with it, this is where this gets tricky. It's that user experience, especially amongst executives, that I was having this conversation with somebody who's not in the IT security industry, and it was really around Equifax. And they were saying, is it just that hard? And I said, well, yes and no. We know how to secure data. We don't know how to secure data and make business happy at the same time. There's just too much give and pull between those two. We don't know. We haven't found the right balance yet. And clearly we keep getting our ass kicked because of it.
Yep. It's true.
A little off topic, but...
Well, speaking of ass kicking...
Yeah, that sounds fun. Let's talk about that.
So, a couple of updates on Equifax. So this first story comes from Bloomberg, and the title is, "The Equifax hack has the hallmarks of state-sponsored pros."
Of course it does. Doesn't everyone?
Holy cow. So it's actually a pretty well-written article, and they talk about how the reason, I guess the reason behind the assertion that this is likely to be a nation state is some people they interviewed said it was, and which take that.
Work here's done. We're done.
Take that for what it's worth. And B, apparently in the ensuing investigation, which apparently leaked all over the place, they identified that the attack happened kind of in two waves. The first was, the initial entry was perpetrated by what they called an entry team, who apparently was pretty low skill, and then there was evidence that the compromise was handed off to a much more skilled team. And I found it really interesting. The reason that by the way, I suspect we're going to hear stuff dribbling out about this breach for a long time to come, because they actually had something pretty cool in place. They were running this software called Moloch, which is an open source massively scalable, effectively PCAP capture, full network capture software. So apparently they have like all the network traffic. Some of the allegations or some of the assertions I've heard, not in this report, but one of the well, go ahead.
It appears they have more than just network traffic. It appears they have individual commands and keystrokes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it looks at a system level that they were capturing as well.
Right. So they have a lot of data. My understanding is one of the reasons behind, and you can take it for what it's worth, right? But one of the reasons why there was such a big delay between the time it was detected and when it was disclosed was they had so much data to analyze. They apparently wanted to get through a lot of it. I'm not sure it's a good reason, but it appears to be the reason. So anyway, one of the
but
go ahead.
this. Sorry. Clearly, we did not coordinate well on our notes tonight.
Nope.
This is such a great example of the signal and the noise.
Mm-hmm.
After the incident, looking back at your activity is much, much, much easier than detecting it at the time.
Yes.
Right? So you can have all these tools generating a crap load of data, but how do you know what's valuable? After the fact, great. In the incident, during the incident,
not so
but
much.
Yes, I was going to say earlier, this is actually a fairly interesting article, well written, especially for a non-technical press outlet.
Yeah, definitely.
I did find that the entry team versus what they call the dwell team or whomever, again, could indicate. I would say it indicates a professional organization, but doesn't scream to me that it has to be state sponsored. Just could be a well-run criminal organization.
Right. And so it was kind of some interesting things in here. One is that one of the people they interviewed said that they believe it is nation state. However, even though a lot of the tools used and techniques apparently mirror those used in Anthem and the OPM breach, which was attributed to China, this one apparently, according to this unnamed source, is being identified as a nation state, but not China. So
mirroring techniques, these are digital techniques. There's nothing exclusive about them.
No, that's true. But I think, there's a lot of, especially web shells, which so one of the issues with this particular breach was that the server was compromised using the Struts vulnerability, and the attackers planted 30 different web shells. And as I understand it, one of them was the China Chopper web shell, and that's been kind of a hallmark of a particular Chinese adversary. But like you said, that can be used by anybody, right? And once it's out there, kind of like we saw with the NSA data being stolen, it can be used by anybody. It's not exclusive, and especially if it works and can lead to some kind of confusion over who perpetrated the attack. That's all the better.
Yeah, it's true.
So the one thing that struck me with this is that, and again, this is assuming the hypothesis that it is a APT, and they do have the low tech or the low skill entry team, and then the higher skill persistence and deeper intrusion team. It led me to wonder, was this a targeted attack at all, or was this just some actor out there who has a low skills group out there just trolling, looking for stuff they can get into, and then passing it off to to another team, to do some kind of deeper penetration on. And if that's the case, that's that's has an interesting implication in that, you can possibly help defend yourself against those more sophisticated adversaries just by being more difficult to hack than those low skill entry teams can get through.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think if we look at the chronology, and we have an article in here that actually lays this out fairly nicely. March 8th is when the original alert went out from CERT, which is probably after the Apache alert went out. I'd have to go back and see when Apache actually put their alert out. And it wasn't until May 13th that they got popped. So it's very likely in my mind that folks were scanning in some methodology for stuff internet facing that had this vulnerability on it.
Right.
And then, so it's very likely in my mind that this was a randomly identified vulnerability, but a very hot commodity once found because of the data being kept by this organization.
Right. Right. So there, I guess point is there may not be some deeper meaning behind the breach. It could just have been a,
it's also very conceivable that this original team who found it then sold access to a more sophisticated team.
We know that happens. We know that has happened.
You get and you go, wow, this is Equifax, and here's what they do, and you sell that on the open market to a more sophisticated team that can make use of it.
Right.
And quickly monetize and move on.
Right.
And this article actually goes into some other interesting things too about that why it may be nation state is we haven't seen use of this data, we haven't seen it being sold, we haven't seen this, we haven't seen that. That's also making a lot of assumptions that all bad guys operate the same way and with idealistic logic and self motivations involved. That's just not the case.
Right. Yep.
So I'm not saying it's not a nation state, but I don't know. But this is actually a really interesting article. I mean, there's a lot of different interesting nuggets in here worth reading. Yeah, it's interesting too. Go ahead.
I was going to say they talk about the previous breaches, or the previous breach with Equifax, where it really wasn't a breach. It was more of an abuse of one of their services, and they had hired Mandiant to investigate. And apparently they got into a bit of a spat with Mandiant, and at least in the article, there's an allegation that says part of the issue with that allowed, and I don't know if this is real or implying too much, but the implication was that the breach went unnoticed in part because of this spat between Equifax and Mandiant.
And according to reports, it was over Equifax feeling that the team that Mandiant sent were not skilled enough.
Correct.
Which I have no idea if that's accurate or not, but it sounds plausible to me, especially when you look at how in demand Mandiant is. And, there's a limited amount of clue available in the world to hire.
Sure.
I'm not throwing Mandiant under the bus here at all, but I've certainly seen consultancies dispatch folks on site with, really, really good folks at the back end backing them up. You can't always get the A players every single time because there's just not that many to go around.
Yeah. Yep. I also found it interesting. They talk about the the management team a bit, and they talk about how that previously they had hired Tony Spinelli and Nick Nadesto, who, by the way, we used to work with, right?
Yeah. Full disclosure, we used to work with Nick. I don't know if he remembers us, but we remember him.
That's right.
Good guy.
Yep.
Bad to say.
And so they apparently left, I think, back in the 2012, 2013 time frame. There's some speculation about why that happened. There was a quote from somebody else who left more recently saying that that he felt like he was working with the B team. But, also there were some somewhat complimentary statements about the CIO, who was kind of disparaged, saying that she seemed to be doing the right kinds of things and, seemed to be creating some consternation, about about not getting things done fast enough for the business, in which doesn't sound like she was being overly accommodating to me. So, it's I thought that was an interesting characterization. It wasn't all, wasn't kind of a complete slam job on the CISO.
Well, this is such a complicated problem. This organization has grown over many, many, many years. And by organization, I mean Equifax. It's done a lot of M&A. And its entire business is rapidly working with and assessing access to really sensitive data. And this is something that we talk about a lot. This is a fundamental balance between securing data and making it accessible to get the quote-unquote business job done. And where do you find that balance? There's probably ways this data could have been very well secured, but it would have made business more difficult, most likely. And the thing that I probably wonder about and probably could throw the most shade on is, yes, they didn't patch. Yes, their technical tools missed that this wasn't patched. But where was the anomaly detection or backup systems in an assumed breach situation to catch weirdness happening?
Yeah, or to identify that there were 30 different web shells installed on the server.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, any kind of file integrity monitoring tool probably would have caught that. I think there's a lot of different avenues to catch this, and it did sound like they had a lot of good technology in place, but they kind of evaded.
Well, and according to the article, it looks like they invested in a lot of the right technology, but according to this Bloomberg article, it wasn't deployed properly, and they had a lot of turnover in their security department, so it wasn't necessarily being run well.
Right.
Which, yeah, I'll tell you, I see more and more companies trying to justify their security spend against the market, against their peers. I don't care how many Blinky boxes you buy, how well you deploy them and run them is really what matters. You could have the best firewalls in the world, but if you've got really lax firewall policies, what's that doing for you?
Right.
And so it's a really, I think, false sense of security to say, well, we spend 4% of our G&A on IT security. Okay. That doesn't tell me much about the effectiveness of that spend.
Yeah, but there is no good metric to use for that, though. I think that's the challenge.
Yeah, I don't have a better answer, but I don't think that's the appropriate metric to measure either. But I'm still working on that one.
You'll let us know when you get it sorted out, right?
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm right on the edge of it. Any day now.
There's also a bit in here about some of the speeches the CEO had given, which I thought were pretty interesting. One of them,
who's since been forced out.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
In one of the speeches he gave shortly after taking the helm, he talked about how it was kind of an amazing company because they effectively take data that they get for free and then sell it back to the people who gave it to them in the first place. And that's their entire business model. And it just happens to be that this data is kind of highly sensitive. And then the other,
and they crunch on the data to derive more value.
Well, sure. I mean, they're adding value, right? Absolutely.
It goes in the magic black box, and it comes out more valuable.
Absolutely. I didn't mean to disparage that part, but you're right. And then he gave a more recent talk at a university where I think it was in mid-August, when he actually knew about the breach. He knew about the breach at this point. And he talked about how, hacking, the data he has or his company has being hacked was his number one concern. And I got to thinking, how horrible that must have been to deliver that message, knowing in the back of his mind that, and I'm not sticking up for him, but
they might not have known the extent or the impact yet.
Well, according to the timeline, this I think was August 17th, and they said that by oh no, you're right. They didn't have a full accounting until September 4th. So you're right. They could very well have not known.
Well, I mean, he was aware that suspicious activity had occurred,
Right.
but that could be, a once a week report to him for all we know. I don't. It's very possible he didn't know the extent of this at the time he gave that speech, but it's still the right speech. It's still an interesting message, especially with the fact that he basically lost his job over this, and how are other CEOs going to respond? So this is something that is a double-edged sword. We want the executive suites to care so much about security, but now I'm wondering, does that mean that they're just going to crush the existing teams with new asks before they, rather than bulk up on the staff to do more things?
Yeah, I think that has a likely, that's a likely outcome. The other one, and I think we talked about this last time, is Equifax took a big beating about the credentials of their CISO, and I do wonder if there will be a reevaluation by companies of the types of people they employ in those kinds of positions, which I think will be unfortunate if that's one of the outcomes, but it's certainly possible. So moving on to the next story, which also is related, there was there was a lot of furor, especially on Twitter, about the CEO testifying before Congress and blaming like a single IT person for the entire breach. And in the end, I'm not entirely sure that's actually what happened. I haven't actually seen his testimony, but there's the next.
It certainly got a lot of press that's what he did.
Yeah, it sure did. So the next story comes from Data Breach Today, and the title is Equifax ex-CEO blames human error tech failures for breach. And so in this particular article is where the CEO gives the chronology. On March 8th, as you mentioned, the U.S. CERT issues the notice about struts. On March 9th, Equifax apparently forwarded that U.S. CERT notice all over the company, telling people that they needed to go and patch their struts. On March 15th, apparently there was a vulnerability scan performed looking for struts installs, and I guess it didn't find any.
I, by the way, have heard that is fairly common.
Yeah,
a number of vulnerability scanners apparently did not do a good job of picking up this struts thing.
Correct, and I think the reason is, my understanding is that it was typically most of the vulnerability scanners were looking for struts to be installed in a particular location. And if you had integrated struts yourself into a web application, it probably wasn't going to be there. And so I think it wasn't until fairly recently that some of the more common scanners actually had the ability to to detect it in more broadly.
But it makes me wonder what other gaps like that exist, and do we get a false sense of security when our vulnerability scanners aren't picking? Do we trust them too much?
I would say, I think so. I mean, here's my take on this, right? That vulnerability scanners in kind of academic security parlance, this should be a secondary control.
So you'd rather, you would go down the path of having good asset management and,
yes,
and understanding of what you have deployed where,
right?
And
correct,
yeah,
correct. And by the way, it appears to me that's actually how they had run their show, but somehow, some way, this it fell through the cracks, and whoever was whichever team was responsible for that application, didn't realize they had struts or forgot they had struts, or I don't know what, that there's no indication of exactly what went wrong there. But certainly this article reads differently than a lot of the hype, at the time, that it was some, one particular person that just didn't apply the patch, and that's what, the house of cards fell in after that. There's really no indication that's what happened in this, from this article. Now maybe there's something else out there that has more details, which I haven't seen yet. But the report here says that Equifax's internal patch timeline required a 48-hour patch cycle, which
That's pretty aggressive
I don't think
for a large org.
Well, it is very aggressive. It may not be if you think about it from the context of like a critical patch on internet-facing systems. I could see that being a reasonable thing, and maybe that's what they're talking about. But I would be highly skeptical if that is intended or really ever happens on application, especially custom applications. I mean, that's like,
right.
Maybe if you're totally DevOps and all that stuff, you can do that. But I've never seen that kind of thing in other.
Yeah, I would imagine most, especially when you're talking about something like struts, which is a major. I mean, I don't know how invasive this particular patch was, but I've been involved in conversations of going from struts 1 to struts 2, and that's a big change in the organization or in the structure of the code. So if this is a customer-facing web app, which it was a usable part of the business, I gotta wonder if the reality was more, okay, let's load it onto QA, let's test it, and then deploy it kind of thing.
Right.
Which would be typical of most large organizations. Now, I have no idea what the situation really was in Equifax, so I can't speak with any intelligence to what they ran, but that's what I've seen in most ops organizations. Because at the end of the day, they want to stay up. So especially applying some random patch that they've never seen before is probably uncomfortable for them.
Right. Yeah, it's not entirely clear exactly what the timeline was for them actually applying the patch. The timeline continues that on May 13th, the initial breach occurred, and it was compromised all the way until July 30th, which was a day after the malicious traffic or malicious activity was detected by Equifax. And if memory serves, it wasn't patched until sometime in July. I don't remember the exact date, but I do remember seeing a date, and I think it was in late July. Which, maybe it wasn't working its way through QA and test and all that stuff, but kind of hard to say. Let's see. They took the site offline for 11 days on July 30th. Starting on July 30th, once they realized it, and then they analyzed they hired Mandiant on August 2nd, and then they analyzed all of their data, apparently from August 2nd until September 4th, which was the time that they started to do their announcement, which I think went out on the 7th of September, if memory serves. Yep, September 7th.
Yeah.
So, I would say that probably even more than the breach itself, and maybe this will end up being an entire university class on its own. I think probably the worst part about this breach was that what happened after it was disclosed. The website they set up and whatnot, how they handled it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. The response to this has been amateur at best, and a lot can be learned by studying how they misstepped and how you can do it better, for sure.
Yeah, which is interesting because in the previous article they talked about how at least under the previous CISO, Tony Spinelli, they had apparently implemented a regiment of breach response testing and whatnot. So it's kind of unclear if that atrophied or if they just didn't, conceive of this type of a breach or what. But kind of interesting stuff. So anything else that caught your eye on this one?
No, there's so many interesting takeaways, but in the interest of time, we can certainly move on. The one thing I would say though is this is another good example of assumptive breach identification, and figuring out, hey, if somebody were to breach and get root on this web server, what could they do and how would we detect it? And I think that is the way we've got to start shifting our view of these things.
Yeah, and what would they do? What would it look like if they did it, and what kinds of artifacts would we see? And that kind of goes back to the file integrity monitoring types of things, and the anomalous network traffic and those sorts of things. I'm sure. By the way, this is probably a pretty busy site, and so I'm going to guess that even though it was a ton of data being exfiltrated, it probably got lost in the noise given the amount of traffic that it saw. But
Sure.
But I'm going to guess that there probably were some flows that could have been that were giveaways. So kind of like you said, I think the point here is to look at where you have your sensitive stuff, where are the crown jewel type things, and determining what are the different avenues of attack, and what options do you have for detecting it based on how it would likely be attacked. So,
Indeed.
then speaking of attacks, the next story comes from ZDNet, and the title is Wall Street Journal: Kaspersky software likely used in Russia-backed NSA breach.
This is another huge, crazy story that we could spend 2 hours on by itself.
Yeah. So the story here is that the NSA apparently lost a bunch of data from an employee. I guess it was an employee. It's a little unclear if it's an employee or another contractor, but I think it's an employee, and I'll come back to why in a minute. But an employee lost, I guess, had taken his work home with him. Was allegedly a member of their tailored access operations unit, the same group who leaked the information to shadow brokers. That they apparently took data home with them, and the allegation is that the Kaspersky antivirus on this person's personal computer, home computer, was used by the Russian government to pull back these top secret files, which apparently contained all sorts of NSA hacking tools. And there's been a lot of speculation in the in the circles that I run in about how that might have happened, but certainly nothing confirmed. The scuttlebutt is that antivirus, it obviously scans your computer, and often pings back MD5s or some kind of hash and maybe even a file name back up to a cloud service, and the hypothesis is that some Russian government entity was monitoring that traffic, looking for known keywords or known file hashes, and suddenly it popped up, and then they were able to somehow take control of the agent and used it to pull back copies of the data. So,
yeah, it's a weird one. It makes sense, but who knows whether or not Kaspersky was complicit.
Yeah, and so that's certainly been Kaspersky's response, is that they would not knowingly conspire or cooperate in any kind of thing like this, and which by the way follows all this follows, I think, about 2 weeks behind a request or an order by the U.S. government to cease using Kaspersky antivirus. So now at the time when that happened, everybody kind of wondered if maybe this is just like tit for tat kind of thing going on with Russia. But now it makes a little more sense. But what makes even more sense is the next story I have here, which comes from the Washington Post. Actually, is it the Washington? Let's see. Yes, Washington Post. The title here is Israeli hacked Kaspersky, then tipped the NSA that its tools have been breached.
Which is starting to connect some pieces of the puzzle.
Yes.
Assuming it's true.
So allegedly, the NSA was notified by the Israeli intelligence agency, I guess, would be the Mossad, I suppose. I don't know. Anyway, because they had hacked Kaspersky and were kind of hanging out in Kaspersky's network,
Allegedly.
And saw allegedly Russia, who apparently had also hacked allegedly into into Kaspersky's network, pulling back these files.
Now, kids, this is actually nation state.
This definitely does appear to be real big boy nation state stuff going on right here. So,
and it always amazes me that this stuff gets into the media, because I gotta think these leaks are intentional and on purpose at this level.
Yeah, I would imagine.
I mean,
so.
without it being a Snowden type situation, these sorts of leaks are tactical in nature.
Right. It's for a purpose. It's for a purpose. So yeah. The story here is that, again, Israeli intelligence agencies or agents were inside Kaspersky's network. They saw Russian agents also inside Kaspersky's network actually doing this, and they notified the NSA, who then launched an investigation and kind of tracked back how this apparently happened, and realized that one of their employees was using Kaspersky antivirus on his home computer, and then started to put two and two together that this person must have been carrying out code and putting it on his home computer, which was then being captured by Kaspersky, or by Russia via Kaspersky, which, by the way, is an incredible. I mean, coincidence isn't the right word, but just a really crazy confluence of events that would enable that kind of thing to happen. So yeah, apparently there's some employee, and the reason I said it was an employee, because they actually mentioned that it's an employee in this particular article that's under investigation.
Look, he was just trying to get some work done at home. He was going over and above, working extra hours, trying to keep us safe.
Yeah, well, so kind of going back. By the way, this kind of plugs some interesting things back together, right? Because if this sort of thing is happening in the U.S., it's probably not hard to think that it's happening in most other countries where people who are working in such intelligence operations, are taking their work product home, and certainly we don't know what this person was doing with the code once he got it home, right? But it's not hard to think that somebody who had access and the knowledge and how to use that, who's also working at a government job, probably not making a hell of a lot of money. It is not a huge leap to think that someone, again, complete speculation, but somebody like that could use that code and knowledge to moonlight and make a lot of money.
Could be that the way they were judged and needed to work made them work at home and break security rules to try to achieve their goals.
Yeah, lots of possible causes, and then go ahead.
But the other thing that's interesting is I've heard some fairly irresponsible, in my opinion, speculation of, all the security apparatuses of the major countries do this with their own, AV companies based in their industry. The U.S. does it too with all our AV, and I'm not so sure I agree.
Well, it. By the way, that is an interesting question, though, right? It is. I don't know. I guess first point is we don't know that Kaspersky was at all involved in this, right? So, I mean, it could entirely be if this set of...
True, but I think their company is going to get massively hurt.
Oh, I completely agree. I think there was a lot, I don't remember the exact percentage, but a majority of their income came from the U.S. So I think it's going to, it's certainly not going to be good for business. But my point is, I don't know that there's any particular reason to think that Kaspersky is unique as a target for this kind of an operation among intelligence agencies. And I'm not sure that it has anything to do with where where those companies are based. I mean, F-Secure is in Finland, and Symantec is in the U.S., and who knows where McAfee is these days.
Well, it makes you wonder how often something like this might happen through VirusTotal too, inadvertently.
Right. Exactly.
It's, you know what? Malware just wants to be free. It wants to just go where the wind blows it.
Yes.
You can't contain it. It's a wild creature that needs to be free.
Yes. So anyway, now your threat model includes your antivirus software. So there you
go. And you know what? We haven't even talked about the random, still not properly named, threat channels coming through software updates of trusted applications.
Oh yes, that's right.
Which appears to be a growing trend, or just being reported more. We're not sure. We haven't done the statistical analysis on that one yet.
Right. So our final story comes from Bleeping Computer, and the title here is IT Admin Trashes Railroad Company Network Before He Leaves.
Because it has trains.
Because it has trains, yeah. It was a great story to end on. So, I mean, nothing, it's certainly no nation state here, but apparently a 46-year-old administrator working for the Canadian Pacific Railway decided that he had been wronged in some HR related manners, and was suspended and then later terminated, or notified that he was going to be terminated, and decided to exact some revenge, and apparently changed passwords and did a couple of other things, which in the scheme of stuff that we've seen in the past, wasn't incredibly damaging. They apparently didn't notice it for like 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I guess it was 3 weeks. So it took a while for them to recognize actually what he had done, and then they claimed that he caused about $30,000 worth of damages, which is again, it's it's not a terrible thing. Now I've on the show, over the years I've been kind of critical about how we often don't really look critically at IT people as a threat actor.
Yeah, because we have to trust somebody, right? And we just, in general, through ease, trust our senior admins and our IT folks.
Right, but I think this highlights that when you've decided that you're going to terminate someone, and that someone happens to be an administrator in your environment, you should probably, and particularly if some bad terms like this apparently was, you probably need to take some action to terminate.
Yeah. So they suspended him, sent him home for 12 days. He came back, decided he was going to resign, said he'd come back the next day with his stuff. Best I can tell, none of his access was disabled during this time.
Correct.
Oops.
So, if you're suspending someone for bad behavior in particular, in my view at least, and this should be I think this kind of goes from the smallest company up to the biggest company. If you're going to send someone home because they've done something wrong, and in particular, if you have an intention to terminate them, lock their access. This is basic
at least
stuff.
Temporary disable it.
It's basic stuff.
But who knows how big the IT organization was for?
Yeah, we don't know.
Canadian Pacific Railway.
It certainly appears like this was a small operation. It doesn't seem like it was a big thing. It wasn't a ton of damage. He was caught. There apparently was evidence found of him running commands, and that was used in the court case against him. And he hasn't been sentenced yet. But it certainly could have been worse. And I would say one of the things that I don't think we have a full handle on is how often this happens. There aren't a whole lot of public incidents of this happening, right? There's, we've talked about a few. There was the school administrator down in Arizona or New Mexico, and there's a few other cases that we've talked about over the years. But I don't know if that's, if that's all that's happened, or if this is just a case where, we're only hearing about the ones where companies or organizations have chose to pursue charges.
Sure.
And I, in my personal experience, there's a lot of organizations out there who, who only would do that under extraordinary circumstances. They have a pretty high threshold of pain before they would pursue something like that. They would just kind of, take their lumps, learn their lessons, and, try to do better next time. So I suspect this is a pretty common, thing, but that's just a hypothesis.
Because it's also embarrassing to the organization for this to go public.
Exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. So I think you're right. I think most just take their lumps and move on.
Right. Because if this would have not happened, right? I mean, if this would have not gone to trial, we would have never known about it.
Well, gone to trial and been picked up in the press.
Right. We would have never known. So
because we are lazy, so we only just look at the news. We're not out doing individual, original source reporting by any sense.
That sounds hard. That sounds really hard.
If I can't pick it up my RSS feed, clearly it's not worth knowing.
That's right.
If I can't Google it.
All right. Well, that thus concludes another happy edition of the Defensive Security Podcast.
Yeah, and by the way, if you like our show and you use iTunes, feel free to rate us.
That's right.
We giggle like school children when we get good ratings.
Oh, we do.
If you don't like us, just quietly fume in your basement. Or send Jerry hate mail. Either way.
Yes, indeed.
Can I also share one other side effect of having a cat?
Absolutely.
So Fiona has a new trick.
Okay.
So she's my 2-year-old Tortie, and apparently instead of being a lap cat, she wants to be a behind you but still on your chair cat.
So she's like a lumbar support cat.
Yes.
I'm looking at the picture you just sent. I'm not sure that it's decent to submit or to post online, but
so about 10 minutes ago, as we're recording, Fiona jumps up on my desk and starts clawing at the side of my body, basically with claws out, until I scooch forward enough on the chair for her to get in behind me and lay down and snuggle up to the back of my body.
It doesn't. I gotta tell you, it doesn't look comfortable.
But she's still there, for the record.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and these are adventures in podcasting.
Animals are weird.
And now that I've told the story, I'm gonna have to tweet out the picture.
Yes.
I apologize for my big old butt being in the picture, but Pixar didn't happen.
At least Photoshop some clothes on.
Yeah, that's why you're my partner. Because without you, I wouldn't even have thought of that. I would just. Wow. Thanks, buddy.
I'm there for you, man.
Good looking out. Looking out.
I am there for you. All right. You can find links to the stories we talked about tonight on our website at www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Callan on Twitter at Lurg and me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And with that, we will hopefully talk again next week.
Have a great week, everybody. Thanks as always for listening and being fans and friends. We love you all. Have a great week.
Take care. Bye-bye.